Hi, I'm Captain Petrie, and I would like to welcome you to a virtual field trip to the Harvard 2 mounted on a pedestal at Kingston Airport. So why is there a yellow airplane parked on a pedestal at Kingston Airport? For that, we have to go back to World War II, when Canada became the aerodrome of democracy and ran the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. This shows how many different airports were created across the country, from coast to coast. This isn't even all of them. This is just the main training facilities. For example, Kingston had 2 auxiliary airports. The one in Gananoque was also one. There were 231 training facilities set up all over Canada, and we trained over 130,000 people. Kingston was a little bit unique in that originally it was a surface flying training school based in Peterborough, England, that was picked up. All the crew and all the equipment were brought over and set up in Kingston. At the start, one of the main aircraft being used to train in Kingston was the Ferry Battle. This example here was built in England and immediately shipped over to Canada and was used in Kingston for the year 1941 before it was converted and the turret you see was added onto the back. Another aircraft often seen over the skies of Kingston was the Westland Lysander. These were used for towing targets for gunners to practice on, and that's why they have that nice colorful bumblebee-like appearance. They were also used very much in Europe for bringing spies and dropping them behind enemy lines. They're very capable aircraft at flying low and slow and landing in very small fields, so quite the interesting aircraft. The plane I'm going to talk about the most now is this aircraft that's pictured here, the Harvard Mark II. The Harvards were designed by North American Aviation, a U.S. company, and there's many different versions of it. They used it as an advanced trainer to prepare people to fly fighters. Very maneuverable, very popular aircraft these days with warbird aficionados for its ability to do some very impressive acrobatics and still at the same time be relatively inexpensive for a warbird. The example here is painted in the colors of the aircraft that was flown by John Gillespie Magee, who's better known as the author of the poem High Flight, and it's based out of Gatineau, Quebec. This particular Harvard was built in 1941 by North American Aviation and was delivered to the Royal Canadian Air Force 25th of August 1941. It spent its entire career either flying in Kingston or being repaired after having a number of minor accidents. This Harvard ended its career with the RCAF with an unfortunate incident at about 3:30 in the morning on the 28th of September 1943. The pilot flying solo, practicing his nighttime landings, acting leading airman Fitton, unfortunately crashed the aircraft in Collins Bay and was killed. In 1983, the aircraft was raised from Collins Bay, and approximately 7 years were spent refurbishing the aircraft and turning it into the aircraft we now see mounted on the pedestal. One of the things that makes this interesting is it acts as a weather vane. For example, in this photo, we're looking basically north, and you can see the aircraft is actually pointing more of a southwesterly direction. In this photo, we're looking to the north, and the aircraft is pointing basically to the north. If you've been paying attention to some of the photos, you might notice that in some of the photos like this one, the aircraft looks very well painted and looks very nice. That's because it was actually taken off the pedestal in 2014 and repainted and refurbished, and a little bit of work done to try maintaining the quality of the aircraft because it had been up there for so long, having been up there since 1990. So a lot of the paint in some of the more recent photos are much better quality. So while we're here, let's start talking about the different parts of the aircraft. There's a couple of different parts of the aircraft here that are quite interesting. There's the propeller and then there's the engine. Both of them help make the Harvard such an interesting aircraft. The Harvard had a very common aircraft engine in the World War II era called a radial engine. You can always tell what type of airplane has a radial engine because it's got a round cowl. It's got a very distinct shape. This radial engine is a WASP engine. Here's an example of one taken outside of the aircraft. And you'll notice that the cylinders, which are those gray things, are protruding outside, and they actually react in a pattern, so they give a smooth a ride as possible, but they're always alternating and providing force to a central rotating camshaft. The propeller on the Harvard was what they call a controllable pitch. It's very much the same way as the transmission within a car. The pitch adjusts whether you're in low gear and you're trying to build up speed at a lower velocity, or you're trying to cruise at a higher gear. And the pilot was able to control that within the cockpit. And you can sort of see some of the mechanism here looking at the propeller. If you've ever had the pleasure of seeing a Harvard flight, you will know that they have a very distinct sound, which is caused by the tips of the propeller actually breaking the sound barrier at full throttle, which gives a very distinct rattle that you can hear in this video. I'd also like to take this opportunity to talk about some of the different parts of the aircraft. We don't always get a chance to have a live airplane to take a look at and look at the different parts. We're looking at the empennage here. That's what we call the tail section or the rear section of the aircraft. The parts that we can see here, we can see a tail wheel, which is a very classic World War II. Most modern aircraft are tricycle gear, which means you have a big nose wheel, but this has a tail gear. You can also see, if you look very closely, we have the moving parts here. We can see a little tab at the back. What we're seeing here is parts called the trim tab, the elevator, and the horizontal stabilizer. You can also see a little bit of the rudder and the fin and the rudder trim tab available in this picture. So there's lots of different parts of the aircraft that we can see here. For more detail, talk to your officers and they can tell you exactly how this works. Another view of the empennage, you can see the way it's connected to the airplane. We're looking at the wing tip here. You'll notice that there's what the outer control surface there is called an aileron. It is on the back part of the wing, or the trailing edge, and that's what controls the roll of the aircraft, so making one wing go up or one wing go down. Every aircraft has some way of doing that. Most of them have an aileron, and that's what we see here on this Harvard. That strange silver part protruding from the front or the leading edge of the wing, we call that the pitot tube, and that's the way the airplane uses the pressure difference between the air being rammed into the front of that pitot tube and the pressure around the airplane to determine the airspeed of the aircraft. So available in every airplane, a very important mechanism to know how fast the aircraft is going. The Harvard is what we refer to as a retractable gear aircraft. If you look very closely, you can see how the wheels of the airplane sort of seem to be able to fold up and fit into that area. If you look at previous photos, you can see how the wheels are folded up. There's a very similar aircraft to the Harvard called the Yale, which does not have retractable landing gear, but you can see where the gear in this Harvard would fit in this close-up here. You'll also notice there's an area here where the triangle there with the black area, that's the oleo and the strut, and that absorbs the shock of landing. So landing gear is very important, and the Harvard landing gear was quite strong to be able to deal with the impact of student pilots not exactly being the best at landing. In these shots, if you look at the very back of the aircraft, you can see the empennage again. We have our rudder, which is the moving part at the very back of the aircraft, and on there's this little rectangle. We call that the trim tab, and what that does is allows the pilot to adjust the airplane to always have a little bit of a yaw, which is what we call the side-to-side motion of the nose, to correct for things such as throttle settings that will make the airplane want to roll the nose one way or the other. So we've got a close-up here, and you can see from the cockpit the pilot can adjust that. And you can also see on the horizontal surfaces we have the horizontal stabilizer, the elevator, and on the back of that we have trim tabs as well. If you want to learn more about trim tabs, talk to your ground school instructor, talk to a pilot, and they can explain how that makes it easier and more comfortable for the pilot to fly the airplane by relieving some of the pressure, making it so they don't need to use the rudder pedals as much. We have a close-up here of the landing gear. This is the tail wheel, not designed to absorb the impact of landing. The Harvard was a two-seater, and you can see here that there was a lot of room in this nice greenhouse canopy to be able to allow the pilot, while they're training, to see what's going on around them and get a good view of the terrain. What we see here is what we call the boost tab. The little rectangle on the very back of that control surface is the aileron. That boost tab, it actually works opposite the way the aileron works and makes it so when the pilot moves the stick, there's an aerodynamic effect that assists the pilot in making sure that the aileron moves faster. It makes it easier for the pilot to control and gives it better aerodynamics and gives you the aerobatic ability that the Harvard is renowned for. So as you can see here, this Harvard was dedicated to Lieutenant Robert Hampton Gray. You can see here that he was one of the last pilots to die in World War II. From the Commonwealth side, he was doing an attack on a Japanese destroyer the same day as the second atomic bomb was dropped, and pressed on his attack and was actually awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions during that battle. Vintage Wings of Canada also had a Corsair, which is the aircraft Hampton Gray was flying when he crashed. They have an example painted up in the colors that his would have done. It was called the Gray Ghost, and they had it flying for a while. Unfortunately, it was damaged in a crash in 2019, and we're not sure if it will be repaired after that crash. So thank you for watching this virtual tour of the Kingston Harvard. I hope you learned a little bit of something. If you do have any questions about some of the material here, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to your squadron staff and maybe they can help answer the questions. But I'm always here if you do want to learn more. Pay attention to the world around you. There's a lot of history that takes place, and some of it can have happened very close to home. Thank you once again for watching my video, and I hope you learned something from it.